I want to thank the music team and our reader this week. We're continuing on this journey of who you are. It's a series of guiding ourselves to listen to that inner voice within us and figure out who we are spiritually as individuals. What are our approaches to everyday life and how do we bring our own spirituality into that? And this series is all about thriving and growing in all aspects of our lives. This week we're talking about echoes of the past. Last week we focused on living your own spirituality and releasing any worry, remembering that we are the master of our own clay of our life, and so we want to become those master potters and shape it in that perfect way. And so this week we're going to pause and look back at what are the things from our past that might be affecting us in terms of growing our own spirituality. In Matthew, we read this: "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And today, as we look at how our treasure is sometimes caught up with the messages from people that loved us or perhaps cared about us when we were growing up, the question for you is this: what's the one thing that you might do today to remember your individuality and to be willing to choose your own ideas, knowing you choose wisely? So one more time, what's the one thing that you might do today to remember your own individuality and to be willing to choose your own ideas, knowing that you choose wisely? Because each of us are unique. And this topic, Echoes of the Past, is about how the past affects the current things and the current ways that we're living. And Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote this in his essay on self-reliance: "Man postpones or remembers. He does not live in the present, but with reverted eye laments the past, or heedless of the riches that surround him, stands on tiptoe to foresee the future. He cannot be happy and strong until he lives with nature in the present above time." Living with nature in the present above time. Just thinking about the fact that every moment is the moment that we have to cherish. So I'm curious about how many of us, including myself, might be lamenting the recent pre-COVID times in our lives, when we could move about freely. We didn't have to worry about contacting other people, getting a deadly disease by hugging our friends and our neighbors. And we could come together at the center in community, or at our schools, or at our friends' houses to play bunco or to have game night. We could go to the movies and not have to worry. We could travel to see our grandkids or to see parts of the world. COVID has changed how we live. And this desire, even on my part, to live in that recent past brought up for me a question that I think is quite pertinent to this topic. Is God evident even in the storms of my life? It's a question worth considering, and I'd like you to consider, is God evident even through the storms of your life? Because in that same essay on self-reliance, Emerson wrote this: "Discontent is the want of self-reliance. It is infirmity of will." Discontent is the want of self-reliance. Emerson says we can't be happy and strong unless we live with nature in the present. And he also said, and I'm paraphrasing another part of the essay, that God doesn't want his work to manifest in cowards. I don't know exactly what the line is, but I loved remembering when I read that. Because when a man puts his heart into his work and does his best, he feels good about it. But when we do otherwise, we really don't have any peace. And Emerson says that our genius deserts us. As a matter of fact, this line is really important from his essay. Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string. So how do we get past the impact of COVID and learn to live in the present situation that we're living in? The practice of truth is personal to each of us. And in the long run, no one can live our lives for us. We have to make our choices. It's our responsibility to recognize that feeling disconnected is a choice. I know that sounds strange and might sound like it's pushing some of your buttons, but feeling disconnected is a choice. In this time of Zoom and Facebook and other ways to connect, be they not the most personal, we can still create connection. It looks different than it used to look, but if we're going to live in this present and learn to live in the present, then we have to let go of missing the gatherings at the center, of missing hugging people for now. We can choose to lament the past, or we can stand in the knowing that the future is going to be something better. This too shall pass, as we discussed last week. And we can know that as it passes, there might still be some changes and things that we have to adapt to that aren't like pre-COVID life. I've heard actually people say that they're more connected to some of their friends and family because they've made an effort to use Zoom and FaceTime and some of the other ways to connect, and they've had a little bit more time because they're not driving back and forth to work. Granted, they might be in their houses cooped up with their kids, but in any event, some people have made a way in this day to actually be more connected with friends. I got an actual card for my niece. I love that she sent me a card in the mail. And when I speak of the center in this community, there are things you can do to connect to the center. You can join in our midweek meditation every Wednesday night at 6. We always have a connection time during that. You can come join us for Poetry as a Spiritual Practice every second Saturday of the month. You can call in for the Sunday conference calls right after our service today. We spend some time in there not only processing and talking about what the service concept was about, but also about connecting with each other. You bring your own snacks. We're on a conference call, but it's still a way that we can connect. So let me expand this concept, however, of echoes of the past beyond COVID and getting past COVID. Because connection is not the only echo of the past in many of us that keeps us from really truly living all of our spirituality. Many of us have a habit of taking in everything that somebody says to us. Anybody else guilty of that? If somebody says that I've done something that they didn't like, it's like somebody just put a little stab in my heart. You know, you can't always please everybody all of the time, but it's hard to remember that when somebody you care about is telling you something you would really prefer not to hear. And the thing is, we don't have to embrace all the words of other people. Remember, Emerson said, trust thyself. And on the other hand, I know that each of us has been impacted at some point along the way by someone that said something to us, someone that we loved or that we knew loved us or that we thought loved us or was part of our lives. And you probably still remember some of the things that you were told. Anybody told that they were too fat or too short or too loud? You know, there's that saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Well, I really think that's bunk. You know, we heal from the sticks and stone bruises. Those words, we don't heal from nearly as quickly. We know in this philosophy that our word is powerful. And words we hear when we're small from somebody that is a person that we love impact us a lot. we hear from somebody that betrayed our trust. That still impacts us. We hear words from religion, dogmas that said we're sinners and we need to repent, or that we're not good enough because our lifestyle is not the usual one. So another of today's lesson is learning to recognize what it is in our past that's impacting our current relationships in many aspects of our lives, including our self-worth. And not just learning to recognize it, but being willing to do something about it. Okay, so where are those echoes for you that show up over and over again and keep you from being your own powerful self? Did you get that question? Where are the echoes for you that show up over and over again that keep you from being your own powerful self? Do you think that your relationship with friends or family or self-worth or money, can you identify the words and the actions of people in your past that have impacted that? And maybe some of the things that you've adopted as the truth, even without knowing it. So there's this story of this blackbird, and he found this big piece of food at a little cafe close to the beach. And he put it in his beak and he flew up into the sky, and all of his friends, of course, wanted some of this food. And so they started pecking at his beak, and it was a very raucous situation. You can imagine. You know, they're all wanting their piece of the pie. And so at some point, the blackbird finally decided to just release what was left in his beak. And when he did that, all of the rest of the birds swooped down to get it, and he thought to himself, I've lost the food, but I've regained my peaceful sky. I've lost the food, but I've regained my peaceful sky. Do you think that we get caught up in something and in holding on to something so tight that we think we want, rather than recognizing that our behaviors might be other people's view of how to live our life? Are we hanging on like that blackbird to a piece of food and allowing all the raucousness around us rather than just letting go of it and finding our peace by doing something that was much more valuable? Letting go of the food, letting the other people have it. What from your past are you holding on to? What from your past is not serving you, and maybe it's time to let it go? Maybe it's time to let go of some belief that perhaps isn't even yours. Maybe you got it from your parents or from a friend when you were growing up. If it has to do with your self-worth or with some aspect of you that you possibly are taking somebody else's opinion about, maybe it's time to let go. Can you believe that you can actually live with everything you need, and that's naturally the way that the divine has designed your life to be? The divine has not designed your life so that you have to struggle. So if you don't believe that you can live in a world where everything is for you, why do you just distrust Spirit to provide for you what it is you need? If we can accept that our abundance, our relationships, and our own perfection is the natural way of doing things, it would follow that we remember that we have the power to choose. We have the power to choose who we are and how we live. And that's a huge power. This choice is influenced by a lot of different people, but we do have the power to choose. I realize that parents and teachers influences. Think about it. If you ask a fifth grader who they would vote for if they could vote in this election, guess what? Almost 100% of them will tell you who their parents are voting for, because they are influenced by their parents' opinions. And how many of you eat certain foods together because it's the way you ate them when you grew up? Hey, for me, mac and cheese and applesauce. I mean, one without the other seems that something's missing. Or pork chops with mashed potatoes and petit pois peas. It's just that we are influenced by those things that we learned when we were younger, and we never stop to actually consider, is this something the way I would do it now that I'm an adult? Or is this just something that's become a habit, and maybe I could do it a different way? Those examples might seem simple, but they illustrate how highly influenced our habits are and our belief systems are by people that surrounded us as we were growing up and as we were developing our own version of what our truth was. Perhaps as we branch out and learn new things, we could think differently, especially if we let go of the things that are no longer serving us. There was a scholar, and he was taking this trip on a ship, and he thought it was necessary for him to show the sailors how brilliant he was. So every day he would stop the sailors and he would ask them a question. Tell me, my good man, do you know philosophy? And of course the sailor would say, no, I'm just a sailor, a simple sailor. I only know how to sail this ship from one shore to another. And then he would say to the sailor, you poor man, you've wasted your life. Then the next day would come along and he would ask another sailor, tell me, my good man, do you know geometry? And of course the sailor would say, no, I'm just a simple sailor. I just rig the sails and keep the ship afloat. And the scholar would say again, you poor man, living in ignorance. You must really have wasted much of your life. So he did this day after day, asking the sailors, did they know astronomy? Did they know zoology? Did they know psychology? And it went on and on. And then one night, the ship was bouncing around on the ocean, and there was these terrible storms. And the sailor came and noticed the scholar, and he said, excuse me, my good man, do you know swimology? And of course, the scholar was puzzled, and he says, no, I don't. And so the sailor said, that's really too bad. You've wasted your entire life. This ship is sinking. So what is it when we take on some way of trying to be scholarly and having that power of choice that our way is the only way that other people should be living? It's not the truth. Just because something is good for the way you live doesn't mean that it's the way other people need to live. And yet this scholar decided that his way was the only right way to be a good man in life and to have not wasted his life. In the Gospel of Thomas, there's this phrase, that which you have will save you if you bring it forth from yourself. That which you have will save you if you bring it forth from yourself. And the key phrase in that is if you bring it forth. If you trust what's within inside of you. If you trust that knowing that what it is that you have within you is going to support you. And in tune with the infinite, Ralph Waldo Emerson said this, do you want to be a power in the world? Then be yourself. Don't class yourself. Don't allow yourself to be classed among the secondhand, among the they say people. Be true to the highest within your own soul. And then allow yourself to be governed by no customs or conventionalities or arbitrary man-made rules that are not founded on principle. If you want to be true to yourself, and if you want to be a power in the world, be true to the highest within your own soul. That is really important because we need to learn to break the old habits and release those ingrained beliefs that aren't serving us. We know what the echoes of the past are that impact our lives. We've been looking at some of them. I want to talk about, once you recognize what they are for you, how do you go about breaking those old habits? Because it's one thing to recognize that you have to eat macaroni and cheese with applesauce. It's another thing Do you really want to change that? For me, I'm not going to change that, but hey, there are things in my life, like my second grade teacher that told me I couldn't draw and I was terrible and I wasn't creative. I carried that for a long time, and at some point I had to choose to recognize that creativity wasn't limited to being able to be an artist and draw something on a piece of paper. My creativity shows up in other ways. So where are the echoes of your past that you would like to actually have an opportunity to break those old habits and move forward, trusting the highest within your own soul? So Emma Curtis Hopkins in Scientific Christian Mental Practice has an analogy that I think is very useful when we look at breaking old habits. And this is what she said. Suppose the rain and dust have beaten against the plate glass windows until they're very dirty. Do you think the mere cessation of the rain and dust will make the window panes clean? So it is with the mind that is covered with years of habitual imaginations. It ceases from imaginations, but practical daily washings of the dust of years must be made. So when we have all of these habits and all of these influences, these echoes of the past that have been on our belief systems and on our minds for years and years, just because we become aware of them doesn't mean that they're going to go away. We all have old habits, old patterns that can be broken. And how we do them, how we decide to wash the dust off of those is very personal. But it takes ideas for us to actually do something. It takes practical daily practice, changing things so that we don't get into those old patterns that aren't working. We have to become aware of them and then actually work at changing them into something different. You know, in this philosophy, we don't dwell on repenting from our sins or from missing the mark, which is really what sinning is. We're not accustomed to doing evil. But habits that don't serve us are our own way of doing evil. Imagine the good that we could do ourselves and others by being willing to break the old patterns that keep us from listening to the spiritual messages of our own abundance, our own self-worth, our own wisdom, our own relationships. You put it in there, your own finances, whatever it might be. Dr. Joseph Murray in The Power of Your Subconscious Mind said this: begin now to take care of your conscious mind, knowing in your heart and soul that your subconscious mind is always expressing, reproducing, and manifesting according to your habitual thinking. We're always expressing, reproducing, and manifesting according to our own habitual thinking. Now that is a thought. So what is your habitual thinking? Are you aware of what you're thinking, or are you just going through the motions every day? And once you become aware of your thinking, are you aware of the origin of those thoughts? Are they actually your thoughts? Are there someone else's that you adopted? And if they are someone else's that you adopted, are they serving you? Or did you adopt them because you actually liked the person that had that thought? Or you wanted to imitate somebody that you thought was a great role model? Remember, trust thyself. Reverend Dr. Alice Bundy was one of my instructors in my ministerial school, and she wrote this book, The Wisdom of Money. And the book actually has way more to do with money. It's really about the wisdom of whatever, fill in the blank. And she said this: you are a unique individual walking your own path through life. You are a unique individual walking your own path through life. I see many people out there not walking their own path, but rather following someone else's path because whatever the reason, because that's the way they grew up, following someone else's path. We have to find within ourselves our own path, our own truths, our own ideas. If we want to be happy, we have to bring forth our own truth. It's really important. If we want to be happy, it has to be our truth. We have to live with nature in the present, as Emerson said, in self-reliance. Can you believe that you can live with everything you need, and that's naturally the way it was designed to be? I asked you that question earlier. I'm here to tell you you can, and it is the natural way. Embracing choices are wise, and they are in divine order. Whatever choices you make, it's part of the divine order. You really can't do something that's not part of the divine order. And this is not to say that your life is predestined, because we know we have choices. But we also know that we have the ability to get whatever it is we need just for the asking. In Corinthians, there's this quote, "If any man is in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things become new." So there's this story of Queen Victoria, and she went to this paper mill. And without knowing it, the foreman didn't really recognize her. And so he took her all around the mill, showed her all the different workings of the different parts of the mill. And she went into the rag sorting part of the mill. And she inquired about what was done with all those dirty rags when they were finished. And the foreman said, "Well, we actually turned them into the finest writing paper." And so a few weeks later, when she was back at her home, the foreman had realized who she was. Someone had informed him who she was. So he had taken the rags that she had inspected, and she received this box of beautiful, pure white, delicate stationery, and it had a watermark of her face on it. And it was just a gift. And there was the enclosed note that said, "These were made from the dirty rags that you recently inspected." We all have to take the old rags of our past and make them into something new that can be beautiful. When we learn to let go of the echoes of the past, when we learn to break those old habits, and we become spiritually different from what we were before, it's like that fine writing paper. It actually is radically different from the filthy rags from which it was made. So we have a philosophy in which, I'm sure all of you can finish this, there is no spot where God is not. And so it's truly not much of a risk in our stepping out to bring forth our own ideas and our own beliefs. Because if there's no spot where God is not, then in these new beliefs, God's in it somewhere. And sometimes it's just a matter of examining the past and seeing what we're holding on to that's not working for us, or that's so deeply ingrained that for a long time we didn't even realize we were holding on to it, and then moving forward. So we're going to work on that community discussion this week. I'm going to invite you to dial in, because we're going to do some work on what are our beliefs and what are the ones that are so deeply embedded. When we start with a belief, it's like we pour it into the mold of our experience, and it starts to influence our prejudices and the way that we create other beliefs in our lives and the way that we put things into action. Have any of you been shopping for a new car any time in your life? What happens when you start shopping for a car and you find one that you like, and all of a sudden you see all of those cars, that particular make, all over the place, You never noticed them 2 or 3 weeks ago, but now they're everywhere because you become more aware of it. We need to examine our beliefs so that we can become aware of what we're pouring into the molds of our life. What are we doing with our relationships, with our jobs, with our families, with our friends, with our finances, with our self-worth? What area of your life do you feel discontent? Because if you feel discontent in some area of your life, I can pretty much guarantee you that you have some hidden beliefs there that you need to go dig up and take those dirty rags and turn them into something that's much more beautiful for you in your life. We all have many people in our lives whom we admire and who've had a big impact on who we are and how we think. And it's not always easy to separate our beliefs from the people that we got them from. We adopted these beliefs from other people, but we trusted them and we loved them and we cared about them. So one of the ways that you can actually figure out if it's something that is a belief that you want to continue to hold on is to just sit quietly with your heart and say, is this belief true for me? Is this belief true for me? And as you do that, your heart's going to tell you the truth. And if it's not, hey, take that belief, turn it into beautiful something that's going to impact you in a more positive way. And we talked last week about being the master potter of the clay of our lives. So where are you using techniques to mold your own clay of your life where those techniques maybe are out of date? Maybe there's newer techniques that will mold your clay into something even more beautiful than you possibly could imagine. It's time to remember that we are unique individuals and we have powerful ideas of our own. And it's time to embrace those ideas. You have the power to choose your own beliefs and your own ways of thinking. I invite you this week to use that power. Don't find yourself drowning on a sinking ship because you thought you already knew everything that you came here to know, or you thought that your way of being a scholar was the only way. Your choices are wise and in divine order, so claim your own consciousness. Pour your own powerful beliefs into your own mold of creativity. So I'm going to ask you, what practices are you willing to put into place so that you can update your knowledge about how to be a master potter of the clay of your life? So you can actually mold that clay with new ideas and new techniques and find something that's amazingly beautiful. What's the one thing that you can do to remember your own individuality and be willing to choose your own ideas, knowing that you choose wisely? I'm going to challenge you this week to notice the echoes of the past and to be willing to break the habits, those old patterns that aren't serving you. Release all of those and remember how powerful you are. Let it be your ideas, not someone else's. So I want to leave you with these words of Ernest Holmes. They come from this thing called you. The barriers between you and your greater good are not barriers in themselves. They are things of thought. Life is like a mirror reflecting the image of your belief. So let's pray. So we're just embracing that divine, knowing that God is flowing in through and as each of us in every moment in this present moment. We don't need to stand on tiptoes to foresee the future. We can live in this moment as beautiful expressions of the divine, embracing all that is within each of us. And what I know to be the truth is that each of us has a power within us that we can use to rid ourselves of any old beliefs that aren't serving us, and to create new, powerful, beautiful beliefs that allow us to live a life that we just love living. So I am so grateful. I am grateful to know that the God without is the God within each of us. And that whatever it is that we make choices about, that those choices are always part of the divine order. I know that each of us knows exactly those habits that don't serve us. We know in our lives where we're discontent, and we can release that discontent by just replacing those old rags with beautiful new wrappings. So it's from all this gratitude that I just release these words into the law of mind, spirit, and action, because I know the divine's already called it good, so I can just let it be. I say amen, and let's affirm it together. And so it is. And this is our time for the offertory song, so I do invite you just to listen to the words of the song and sing along, knowing that whatever it is that you are participating in with respect to your spirituality and supporting that, it's coming back to you multiplied abundantly.